What would you do if someone twice your size challenged everything you believed in? The San Francisco dojo was alive with energy that autumn afternoon in 1964. Sweat dripped from the walls, the sound of fists hitting heavy bags echoed like thunder, and in the center of it all stood Bruce Lee, 5'7", 140 pounds of pure lightning wrapped in human form. His students moved around him like satellites orbiting a star, each one desperate to absorb even a fraction of his knowledge. But on this particular day, something was about to happen that would test not just Bruce's skill, but the very foundation of everything he had built. The double doors burst open with a crash that made everyone freeze mid-punch. Standing in the doorway was a mountain of a man, easily 300 pounds, maybe more. His shadow stretched across the entire length of the dojo floor. This wasn't just any man. This was Big Jack Morrison, a former heavyweight boxer who had spent 15 years breaking jaws and crushing dreams in underground fighting circuits across the country. His knuckles looked like they'd been carved from granite, and the scar running down his left cheek told 1,000 stories, none of them ending well. But why had this giant just walked into Bruce Lee's sacred space? So this is the famous Bruce Lee. Jack's voice rumbled like distant thunder, each word dripping with mockery. He took a step forward, and the wooden floorboards actually groaned under his weight. The little man who thinks he can teach fighting. A cruel smile spread across his face as he surveyed the room, making eye contact with each of Bruce's students. Several of them took an involuntary step back. I've heard stories about you, Lee. They say you're fast. They say you're special. He paused, letting the tension build. They say you can beat any man regardless of size. The room had gone completely silent. Not a single breath could be heard. Bruce's students looked at their master, waiting for his response. Some of them had been training for years, but none of them had ever seen someone disrespect Bruce like this. Not in his own dojo, not on his own ground. Ted, Bruce's most senior student, clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. He started to move forward, ready to defend his teacher's honor, but Bruce raised one finger, just one, and Ted froze in place. What was going through Bruce Lee's mind at that exact moment? Bruce's expression didn't change. His face remained as calm as a mountain lake before dawn. He was still holding the focus mitts he'd been using to train his students, and he set them down slowly, deliberately, never taking his eyes off the giant. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made everyone lean in to listen. "Why are you here?" Bruce asked, his Cantonese accent mixing perfectly with his English words. There was no anger in his voice, no fear, just pure curiosity. It was as if someone had simply knocked on his door to ask for directions. Jack threw his head back and laughed, a sound that seemed to shake the very walls. "Why am I here? I'm here because I'm tired of hearing about you, little man. I'm tired of people acting like you're some kind of god. You know what I think?" He took another thunderous step forward. "I think you're all smoke and mirrors. I think you're fast with your hands against students who are afraid to really hit you back. But against a real fighter, a real man," he cracked his knuckles one by one, each pop echoing like a gunshot. "I think you'd crumble like a fortune cookie." Could Bruce Lee actually defeat a man twice his size, or was his legend about to be shattered? Several students gasped. One of the younger ones, a teenager named Michael who'd only been training for 3 months, looked like he might cry. But Bruce's expression still hadn't changed. If anything, he looked almost interested, like a scientist who just discovered a fascinating new specimen. "I see," Bruce said softly. He walked forward, closing the distance between himself and the giant until he was standing just a few feet away. The size difference was staggering. Jack towered over him like a skyscraper over a house. "And what do you propose?" Jack's smile grew wider, revealing a gold tooth that glinted in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "I propose we find out if all these stories are true. You and me right here, right now. No rules, no referees, no stopping until one of us can't continue." He rolled his massive shoulders. "Unless, of course, you're too scared to back up all that talk about your Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do and whatever other fancy names you give to your dancing." The insult hit Bruce's students like a physical blow. Linda, Bruce's wife, had been watching from the side of the room, and even she took a sharp breath. But Bruce simply nodded, as if Jack had just made the most reasonable suggestion in the world. Was Bruce Lee about to make the biggest mistake of his life? "Very well," Bruce said. His voice was still calm, still quiet. But now there was something else underneath it. Something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "But first, let me ask you something. Jack!" The use of the giant's name made Jack's eyebrows rise. He hadn't introduced himself. "You've been fighting for how long? 15 years? 20? 16 years, Jack grunted, surprised that Bruce knew anything about him. 16 years, Bruce repeated, walking in a slow circle around the giant. And in those 16 years you've won how many fights? 100? 200. You've built your entire identity on being bigger, stronger, more powerful than your opponents. Every time you step into a ring or an alley, or wherever you do your fighting, you rely on that weight, that size, that overwhelming force. Bruce stopped walking and looked directly into Jack's eyes. But let me ask you this, have you ever fought water? What kind of question was that? Jack's face twisted in confusion. What the hell are you talking about, Lee? Water. Are you trying to confuse me with some mystical Chinese nonsense? Bruce smiled for the first time since Jack had entered the dojo. It wasn't a mocking smile or an angry smile. It was the smile of a teacher who'd just found the perfect way to illustrate a lesson. Water, Jack. Think about it. Water has no muscle, no weight, no force of its own. You can punch it, kick it, try to crush it with all your strength. And what happens? The room was so quiet you could hear the traffic from the street outside. Every single person was hanging on Bruce's words. Nothing, Bruce continued, his voice taking on an almost poetic quality. Your force passes through it, or the water moves around your fist, flows past your power, adapts to your attack. You can't pin water down, you can't trap it. You can't intimidate it with your size or your scars or your reputation. Water doesn't care about any of that. It simply is. He took a step closer to Jack. That's what I've spent my life learning, Jack. Not how to be harder than my opponent, but how to be like water. Was this just philosophy, or was Bruce about to demonstrate something that would change fighting forever? Jack's face had turned red. Whether from embarrassment at being lectured or from growing anger, no one could tell. Enough talk, Lee. Enough of your fortune cookie wisdom. Let's see if your water can stop my fist. He raised his hands into a boxer's stance, and his fists looked like wrecking balls. I'll give you the first shot. Go ahead, little man. Take your best swing at me. Let's see if you can even move me an inch. The offer was simultaneously generous and humiliating. It was the kind of thing you'd offer to a child, not a master martial artist. Bruce's students looked furious, but Bruce himself simply shook his head. I don't need to move you, Jack, and I don't need the first shot. You can attack whenever you're ready. You sure about that? Jack asked, his voice full of warning. I'm sure. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in martial arts history. Jack didn't wait. For a big man, he moved with surprising speed. His right fist came flying toward Bruce's face like a freight train, carrying all 300 pounds of his weight behind it. The power behind that punch could have broken bones, shattered jaws, ended careers. Several students actually closed their eyes, unable to watch what they thought would be their master's destruction. But Bruce Lee wasn't there anymore. In the time it took Jack's fist to travel from his shoulder to where Bruce's head had been, Bruce had moved. Not jumped away, not stumbled backward. He had flowed, like water running downhill, moving around the punch with such minimal effort that it seemed like he'd barely moved at all. But he was now standing 6 inches to the left, completely untouched, looking up at Jack with that same calm expression. Jack stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him past where Bruce had been standing. He spun around, fury in his eyes, and threw another punch, this time a left hook aimed at Bruce's ribs. Again, Bruce moved. And again it wasn't a dodge or a block. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist in the space where the punch was aimed, reappearing a heartbeat later in a different position entirely. How was this even possible? Stand still! Jack roared, frustration creeping into his voice. He threw a combination, right, left, right, each punch powerful enough to dent steel. Bruce moved through them like smoke, his feet barely seeming to leave the ground, his body relaxed and fluid. He wasn't even breathing hard. The students were starting to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration. Bruce was teaching Jack the same lesson he taught all his students, just in a much more dramatic fashion. Jack threw 12 punches in rapid succession. 12 times his fists hit nothing but air. By the 13th punch he was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his face. Bruce hadn't thrown a single strike yet. He'd simply moved, flowed, adapted. You see the problem with relying only on power, Jack? Bruce's voice was still calm, still teaching. Power is useless if you can't connect. All that strength, all that size, it means nothing if I'm not where you think I am. But was Bruce Lee just going to dodge forever, or was he finally going to show the giant why they called him the dragon? Jack, now furious beyond reason, charged forward like a bull. He wasn't trying to punch anymore. He was trying to grab, to grapple, to use his weight advantage to crush Bruce against the wall. This was what big men always did when their striking failed. They tried to make it a wrestling match where size would finally matter. But Bruce was ready. As Jack reached for him, Bruce suddenly changed from water to lightning. His right hand shot out, not in a wide, powerful arc like Jack's punches, but in a tight, precise strike that moved faster than most people could even see. His fist connected with a pressure point just below Jack's sternum, a spot called the solar plexus. The impact didn't look like much. There was no big, dramatic sound, just a quick snap of movement. But Jack's eyes went wide. All the air left his lungs in a whoosh. His hands dropped to his sides, and for just a moment, all 300 pounds of the giant seemed to forget how to stand. Bruce didn't stop there. His left hand came up and tapped, just tapped, really, a nerve cluster on Jack's shoulder. Jack's right arm went completely numb, hanging uselessly at his side. Then Bruce's foot swept out. Not a powerful kick, but a perfectly placed sweep that caught Jack's ankle at exactly the right angle, at exactly the right moment, and down the giant fell. The crash when Jack hit the floor shook the entire building. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. In the apartment above the dojo, someone dropped a glass and you could hear it shatter, but in the dojo itself no one made a sound. They were all staring at the impossible sight before them. Big Jack Morrison, the 300-pound destroyer of men, lying on his back on the floor, looking up at Bruce Lee with an expression of complete and utter shock. Bruce stood over him, not gloating, not celebrating. He simply offered his hand. "You see, Jack, it's not about being stronger, it's about being smarter. It's about understanding that true martial arts isn't about dominating your opponent with force. It's about achieving victory with the minimum necessary movement, the minimum necessary force." He kept his hand extended. Every attack you threw, you telegraphed it. Every punch came from anger, from ego. That made you predictable. And in a real fight, predictable means defeated. Would Jack take Bruce's hand, or would his pride keep him on the floor? For a long moment, Jack just lay there, breathing hard, his face a mixture of emotions. Shock, embarrassment, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of respect. Then, slowly, he reached up and took Bruce's hand. Bruce helped him to his feet, and the size difference that had seemed so overwhelming at the start of this encounter now seemed almost irrelevant. "How?" Jack started to say, still catching his breath. "How did you—" "I didn't even see what you did." "Exactly," Bruce said with a gentle smile. "You were so busy trying to see where to hit me that you never saw where I was going to hit you. You were thinking about offense while I was thinking about efficiency. Every movement I made had a purpose. Every step took me exactly where I needed to be." He gestured to his students, who were still frozen in place, watching this entire scene unfold. "This is what I teach. Not how to be the strongest, but how to be the most effective. Not how to win with power, but how to win with precision." Jack rubbed his chest where Bruce had struck him. "I've been fighting my whole life. I've fought in rings, in streets, in bars. I've knocked out men who were supposed to be champions." He looked down at his hands, those massive fists that had seemed so formidable just minutes ago. "But I've never fought anyone like you." "That's because you've been fighting, Jack. I don't fight." Bruce's words hung in the air. "I respond. I adapt. I become what the situation requires me to be. Against your strength, I became water, impossible to pin down. Against your aggression, I became precision, striking where you couldn't defend." That's the difference between a brawler and a martial artist. But was this encounter going to end with a handshake, or was there more to come? Jack stood there for another moment, and everyone in the room held their breath. The giant could still decide to attack again. Pride had made men do stupider things. But then, something unexpected happened. Jack bowed. It wasn't a perfect bow. He clearly had no training in Eastern customs, but it was sincere. It was the bow of a man who had just learned a lesson he'd never forget. "Teach me," Jack said, and the room erupted in gasps. "I came here to prove you were a fraud. I came here to expose you, but—" He looked around at all the students watching him. "But you just did something I thought was impossible. You made me, someone who has relied on size and strength my entire life, completely helpless. Without even breaking a sweat. Without even—" He paused, realizing the truth. "You didn't even hurt me. You could have really damaged me with those strikes, but you held back." Bruce nodded. "Because this wasn't about hurting you, Jack, it was about teaching you. The greatest victory isn't destroying your enemy, it's turning your enemy into your student, or even your friend." Ted, Bruce's senior student, stepped forward. His initial anger at Jack had transformed into something else, understanding, maybe, or respect for how the situation had been handled. "Sifu," he said, using the Chinese term for teacher, "should we prepare another training area?" And just like that, the man who had walked in as an enemy was about to become a student. Bruce looked at Jack, really looked at him, seeing not the bully who had burst through his doors but the potential student, the man who had just been humble enough to ask to learn. "Can you train 3 times a week?" "I'll train 7 times a week if you'll have me," Jack replied immediately. 3 is enough. More than that, and you'll train badly. Your body needs rest to absorb what your mind learns. Bruce walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a simple black training uniform. He tossed it to Jack, who caught it with his one good arm. The other was still numb from Bruce's strike. That should fit. It might be a little tight across the shoulders. Some of the students laughed, and even Jack managed a smile. The tension that had filled the room like electricity was dissipating, replaced by something warmer, more human. "But I have to warn you," Bruce continued, his tone becoming more serious. "What I teach is hard. Not hard because it requires strength, you have plenty of that. Hard because it requires you to unlearn everything you think you know about fighting. Hard because it requires you to become humble, to become empty, to become like water. Can you do that?" Jack looked down at the training uniform in his hands. "I don't know, but I want to try." "Then you're already halfway there." Bruce gestured to the changing room. "Go put that on. We'll start with the basics. Linda," he called to his wife, "would you help Jack with the paperwork for enrollment?" But this story doesn't end here. In fact, the most important part hasn't even been told yet. As Jack headed to the changing room, moving a bit stiffly from his encounter with the floor, the other students gathered around Bruce. Michael, the young teenager, spoke first. "Sifu, why did you accept him as a student? He was so disrespectful. He came here to hurt you." Bruce sat down on one of the benches along the wall, gesturing for his students to gather around. This was the real lesson, the one he'd been hoping to teach not just to Jack, but to all of them. "Do you know why I started developing Jeet Kune Do?" Bruce asked. "Why I moved beyond the traditional Wing Chun I learned as a child in Hong Kong? It's because I learned that the greatest limitations we face aren't physical, they're mental." Jack walked in here with a mental limitation. He believed that size and strength were the ultimate weapons. He had built an entire identity around being the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful. Ted nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "And you shattered that belief." "Not just shattered it. I replaced it with something better." Right now, Jack is in that changing room having the most important realization of his life. He's realizing that everything he thought he knew was incomplete. And that realization, that moment of understanding that there's so much more to learn, that's the moment a student is truly born. Could a 300-pound giant really become a master of Bruce Lee's fluid, water-like style? Linda came back from helping Jack with the paperwork. He has a broken nose from a fight last year that never healed properly, and his knuckles are a mess from punching without proper technique. But he seems genuinely committed to learning. "They all come to us broken in some way," Bruce said softly. "Jack is broken physically from years of brutal fighting. Some students come broken mentally, convinced they're too old or too slow or too weak to learn martial arts. Others come broken spiritually, searching for meaning or purpose or confidence." He stood up and walked to the center of the dojo, where his fight with Jack had taken place. There were scuff marks on the floor from Jack's heavy boots. "Our job isn't to judge which kind of broken they are. Our job is to help them become whole." Jack emerged from the changing room wearing the black training uniform. It was indeed tight across his massive shoulders, but he wore it with something approaching pride. He walked over to where the other students were gathered, and for the first time since he'd entered the dojo he looked genuinely uncertain. "Where should I stand?" he asked quietly. "In the back row for today," Bruce replied. "Not as punishment, but because you need to observe before you practice. Watch how the other students move. Notice how they breathe. Pay attention to the way they position their feet, their hips, their shoulders. Don't try to copy them yet. Just watch, just observe, and that's exactly what Jack did. For the next hour, while Bruce led the class through a series of drills and exercises, Jack stood in the back and watched. Every few minutes, Bruce would glance back at him, checking to see if the giant was getting restless or frustrated. But Jack never moved. He watched with an intensity that rivaled his earlier aggression, his eyes tracking every movement, his mind clearly working to understand what he was seeing. When class ended and the other students were packing up their things, Jack approached Bruce one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for not hurting me worse than you could have, but for showing me there's another way." Bruce placed a hand on Jack's massive shoulder. "The first step in learning anything is admitting you don't know everything. You took that step today. It's the hardest step. Everything after this gets easier. Can I ask you something? Jack's voice was hesitant. When you hit me, when you dropped me so easily, did you really need to hit me at all? I mean, you'd already proven you could dodge everything I threw. You could have just kept dodging until I exhausted myself. And here, Bruce Lee gave the answer that would stay with Jack Morrison for the rest of his life. I could have, Bruce admitted. But that wouldn't have taught you anything. You would have left here thinking I got lucky, or that you were having an off day, or that maybe in a real fight where you were more prepared, you could have caught me. Your ego would have protected you from the truth. He released Jack's shoulder and took a step back. By striking you, by showing you exactly how vulnerable you were even to someone half your size, I gave you something more valuable than victory. I gave you the truth. And the truth is the only foundation on which real growth can be built. Jack nodded slowly, absorbing this. I'll see you in 2 days for the next class. I'll be here. Oh, and Jack, Bruce called as the giant headed for the door. Don't practice at home yet. I know you'll want to, but don't. Just think about what you saw today. Let it settle in your mind. Real learning happens not just in the doing but in the reflecting. Yes, Sifu. The word came out awkwardly unfamiliar, but Jack said it with sincerity. After Jack left, one of the other students, a man named Robert who'd been training for 2 years, approached Bruce with a question. Sifu, I have to ask. When Jack first came in, I was terrified. I thought he was going to hurt you. I thought maybe all of us were in danger. But you never looked scared, not even for a second. How did you stay so calm? Bruce smiled. Because I knew something Jack didn't know. I knew that his size was also his weakness. Every pound of muscle he carried meant more weight to move, more momentum to control, more energy to expend. I knew that his anger made him predictable, and I knew that his belief in his own power made him blind to other possibilities. He paused, looking at each of his students in turn. But most importantly, I stayed calm because I had already accepted the worst outcome. Fear comes from attachment. Attachment to winning, attachment to not being hurt, attachment to our pride. I had no attachment to any of those things. I was simply present, simply ready to respond to whatever happened. Is that what you mean when you talk about being like water? Michael asked. Not being attached to outcomes. That's part of it, yes. Water doesn't decide where it's going to flow before it encounters an obstacle. It doesn't make plans or strategies. It simply responds to the terrain it encounters, taking the path of least resistance while still reaching its destination. Bruce walked over to the window, looking out at the San Francisco street below. Today, Jack was an obstacle. But I didn't try to go through him or over him. I simply flowed around him, allowing his own force to become his downfall. But here's the question that everyone was thinking, though no one wanted to ask. Linda was the one who finally voiced it. Bruce, what if Jack hadn't bowed? What if he'd gotten up and attacked you again? What if he hadn't been willing to learn? Bruce turned from the window, and for just a moment, there was something different in his eyes. Something harder. Something that reminded everyone that beneath the philosophy and the teaching and the gentleness was a man who could be genuinely dangerous when necessary. Then I would have escalated proportionally. The strikes I used on Jack, those were gentle by my standards. They were designed to control, to demonstrate, to teach. If he had continued to attack, if he had proven unwilling to learn, then I would have done what was necessary to protect myself and my students. His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. Being like water doesn't mean being weak. Water can wear down mountains, can cut through stone, can become a flood that destroys everything in its path. The key is matching your response to the situation. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this. It was easy to forget, watching Bruce teach and laugh and be patient with struggling students, that this was a man who had trained with some of the most dangerous martial artists in the world, who had spent years refining techniques specifically designed for real combat situations. And that's when Ted asked the question that would reveal the most surprising truth of all. Sifu, have you ever actually had to really hurt someone? I mean, in a real fight where you couldn't hold back? Bruce didn't answer immediately. He walked back to the center of the dojo, to the spot where he'd dropped Jack Morrison with such apparent ease. Once, he finally said, in Hong Kong, when I was younger and much more foolish than I am now, a man challenged me, much like Jack did today, actually. But this man, he didn't come alone. He brought friends. They thought to corner me in an alley, to beat me in front of witnesses, to destroy my reputation. What happened? Michael asked, his eyes wide. I put 3 of them in the hospital. Bruce's voice was flat, emotionless. Broken bones, concussions, one man with internal injuries that took months to heal. And when it was over, when I stood there surrounded by men I had hurt, some part of me felt triumphant, victorious, powerful. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something that sounded almost like regret in his voice. And that's when I knew I had failed as a martial artist. This confession shocked everyone, but Bruce wasn't finished. You see, martial arts isn't about proving you're the strongest or the toughest or the most dangerous. It's about cultivating yourself, about becoming a better human being through the discipline of training. When I hurt those men, even though it was self-defense, even though they attacked me first, I did it with ego. I wanted them to know they'd made a mistake challenging me. I wanted others to hear about it and fear me. I wanted to feel superior. He looked around at his students. That was the moment I realized that all my training, all my skill, meant nothing if I used it from a place of ego rather than necessity. Is that why you accepted Jack as a student? Linda asked. Because you saw yourself in him, perhaps. Or perhaps I saw who he could become if someone showed him a better way. The way I wish someone had shown me before I made my mistakes. Bruce clapped his hands together, breaking the serious mood. But enough heavy talk. Let's clean up the dojo. And tomorrow, we'll begin teaching our newest student how to flow like water instead of crashing like a boulder. 3 months later, something remarkable had happened. Jack Morrison had become one of Bruce Lee's most dedicated students. The transformation was extraordinary, not just physically, though Jack had indeed slimmed down and moved with a grace that seemed impossible for his frame. The real transformation was mental. The angry, aggressive giant who had burst through the dojo doors looking for a fight had become a thoughtful, patient student who approached every lesson with humility and focus. One evening, as Bruce was locking up the dojo, Jack approached him. Sifu, can I ask you something personal? Of course. That day I came here and challenged you. You could have refused. You could have had your students throw me out. Why did you accept? Bruce's answer would reveal the final truth about that legendary encounter. Because, Jack, I saw something in your eyes that day. Behind all the anger, behind all the bravado and the challenges, I saw pain. I saw a man who had built his entire identity on being powerful, and somewhere deep down, I think you were terrified of what would happen if that power was ever proven insufficient. You weren't really trying to beat me that day. You were trying to confirm your own worth, to validate your existence through dominance. Jack's eyes grew moist. You saw all that? I did, because I've felt it myself. Every fighter, every martial artist, every person who pursues strength. We all face that moment where we have to ask ourselves why. Why do we train? Why do we fight? Is it to dominate others? Or is it to master ourselves? Bruce placed his hand on Jack's shoulder, the same gesture he'd made 3 months ago, but now it carried the weight of genuine friendship. You came here a giant, Jack. But you were trapped in that giant's body, prisoner to the belief that your size defined your worth. Now you're still a giant, but you're free. Jack wiped his eyes. Thank you, Sifu, for seeing past the anger, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one. Everyone deserves a chance, Jack. The question is whether they're humble enough to take it. So what's the real lesson of this legendary encounter? It's not about size. It's not about strength. It's not even about martial arts technique, though that was certainly on display. The real lesson is about recognizing that every confrontation, whether in a dojo, in a street, or in life itself, is an opportunity for transformation. Bruce Lee could have humiliated Jack Morrison that day. He could have hurt him badly, driven him from the dojo in shame, made an example of him to boost his own reputation. Instead, he chose to see potential where others saw only threat. He chose to teach where others would have chosen to punish. That's what made Bruce Lee more than just a great fighter. That's what made him a true master. And in case you're wondering, Jack Morrison continued training with Bruce Lee until Bruce moved to Los Angeles to pursue his film career. By then, Jack had transformed completely. He became known in the San Francisco martial arts community not as a giant to be feared, but as a gentle soul who helped beginners find their confidence, who used his imposing presence not to intimidate but to make others feel safe enough to try, to fail, to learn. Years later, after Bruce Lee's tragic death in 1973, Jack Morrison would tell this story to anyone who would listen. Not to brag about the day he fought the legend, but to honor the lesson Bruce had taught him. That true strength isn't about dominating others, it's about mastering yourself. That true victory isn't about proving you're the best, it's about helping others become their best. And every time Jack told the story, he would end it the same way. Bruce Lee could have destroyed me that day. Instead, he saved me. Now here's my question for you. Have you ever had someone in your life who saw your potential even when you were at your worst? Someone who chose to teach you instead of punishing you? And more importantly, have you ever been that person for someone else? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's honor Bruce Lee's legacy by sharing how his philosophy of transformation over domination has touched our own lives.